which is great. For those of you who are new to us, hi there, I'm Chris, CEO and co-founder of The Infatuation. That is Grant Reynolds, partner in Delicious Hospitality Group and Parcel Wine, and also a very masterful sommelier in his own right. We actually wrote a book together that's coming out in less than a month now, How to Drink Wine, which always disappears into my background, but the cover's really cool, and I'll show you it later. So our book is coming out May 12th. You can pre-order it now. We're really excited about it. It's almost here, which feels crazy, but that was part of why we wanted to start doing these, was that we felt like, you know, the book that we wrote called How to Drink Wine is really just hopefully designed to make learning about wine, you know, fun and a little easier, at least in terms of that first step. And we're really excited to put it in people's hands, but also to use that as a vehicle to sort of talk about wine and bring people together. And these sessions are sort of an extension of that. So thank you all for joining Wine School number 4. This is our Spain session, which it does feel like is a popular topic, and certainly, like, Spain for me was one of the first places I started drinking wine from when I was learning about it for a lot of reasons. Before we get into all of that, though, we have another sort of a guest from last week who has graciously joined again. Do you want to introduce Cedric, Grant?
Yeah, so you have Cedric, who was answering questions under my name last time, and now he's got it.
We gave him the honor of having his own name.
Exactly. But Cedric's a really, really good friend, and he's the wine director of 11 Madison Park, which is one of the great restaurants in the world and here in New York City. So he's hanging out. He will answer anything in the Q&A about Spain or really whatever. He's a great cook, so you can talk about food.
Let's try and keep it mostly wine focused, but
no, but like food and wine pairings. I know a lot of people were asking stuff like that, but yeah, mostly wine focused. He's a great golfer too.
We'll talk golf, sure.
But yeah, so you can ask Cedric anything in the Q&A that we don't hit, and then at the end we'll try to hit some of those questions too. You can also upvote, right?
Yeah, you can, if you see questions that are interesting or that you agree with or that you think should be answered, you should be able to still upvote them and sort of thumbs up, so they'll get raised up to the top. And we'll try, either way, we'll be watching and trying to keep an eye on things so that hopefully we're answering the questions that seem like most broadly common across the group. But like, all questions are good questions, and we'll try to get to everything, whether Cedric hits it through the chat or we'll address it through the talk. So the other part of this that should be in the chat, let me just share it one more time to make sure, is the worksheet. So we last week introduced these sort of school worksheets that will run through the topic and the sort of order of things that we're going to cover. We're trying our best to institute as much structure into these as possible. I think I was a bad student, so I don't really know how to make school good, because I was not good at school. I'm sure Grant was an overachiever and had like great grades, but we're still figuring out how to just make these useful. And even though it is a How to Drink Wine school, I think by nature it's meant to be more conversational. And at the end of the day, hopefully it's useful and you guys all find that you learned something. And hopefully this worksheet can be a reference for you later on and down the road. And we're actually retroactively going to try and make a couple worksheets on Burgundy. And I think, what was the other one that we didn't have a worksheet for, that we were just like rambling on? I can't remember. Sicily. So we'll get those done for you as well. There's some questions about these being online and available after the fact. We do record them. We got to figure out a good place to put them. So we'll make sure that you all have access to that. You can also buy wine in advance through Parcel. We have a 6-pack of wine that we've already worked our way through a couple of them, but there's more coming. The Loire Valley, I think, is going to be our topic next week. And so you can go to parcel.com. You can see there's a How to Drink Wine School page. But the easiest way to stay up to date on all of this stuff is just to sign up for the Infatuation Wine newsletter, which we'll make sure that link gets dropped in here right now and periodically through the chat. And that'll be the place where you can find out when's the next class happening, what's the topic, where are the worksheets, how can I buy the wine, all the rest. And we're just trying to make sure we get as much of that information out ahead of time as possible, because that's really been the feedback most people have given us, is that we want to try to have like this shared experience where we're all kind of like drinking the same wine, talking about wine, then you can have a bit more of an interactive participation with it. So with that, let's start with Spain. So like I said, to me, Spain has always been something that's really interesting, just because I kind of was introduced to wine through a lot of Spanish wine, Rioja being one of them. But even like Albarino is a pretty common wine that I would, drink when I was getting introduced to it and exploring it myself. So we felt like it was Rioja is the wine that we put in the newsletter, which we'll focus on obviously when we talk about this first section. But we just kind of thought, there's not so much to talk about with Rioja that we wanted to dive deep into an hour worth of that, but there's a lot to talk about with Spain more broadly, and especially when it comes to wines that are affordable and are value driven and cool and interesting and kind of fun to explore. So that's why we wanted to kind of dive into this. And there is a lot that has to do with Spain. We tried to sort of focus it, as you'll see in the worksheet, to Rioja, what we're calling New Spain, and then that includes the Canary Islands and the Basque Country. But I'm sure there'll be more to talk about. And if you have questions about anything that's not on the worksheet, ask, and we'll try to hit that stuff towards the end. But we're going to do our best to stay focused and organized and working through this in the right order, because I think we probably even bounced around a little bit too much last time. So Grant, do you want to sort of tee off Spain overall and kind of give us your point of view on it as a country, and then we'll dive into Rioja and then everything else from there.
Yeah. So,
and I'm going to be doing stuff on the side with screen shares. So
screen shares. All right. You're the teacher. Hi guys. I hope you all have some wine. You can't really see it, but the Spain. So when I'll put it into context, when we opened up Charlie Bird, I think we had like 3 Spanish wines on the list. One of them was definitely Lopez de Heredia, which is the producer that hopefully you're drinking now, but which we'll talk about a little bit, because they're really the benchmark for Rioja. They're like, very historic, and still today across many different types of wine drinkers considered, the kind of the main family, the main winery in Rioja. And Rioja is definitely, I would say, still today considered kind of like, I don't know, to use like another wine analogy, would be like the Napa Valley of Spain, or the Bordeaux, or Barolo, whatever. But it's Spain's main red wine region, right? So Rioja is the region. You can see it up there on the map. Lopez is in a town called Haro, which isn't really that important. One thing about Rioja, some of you were on the Burgundy lesson. We were talking a lot about villages, and we were talking a lot about these small little towns. Rioja is kind of, it's less about that, and it's more about the region, just because it's a lot bigger than a lot of those areas. And where you can kind of see where Chris is at, the vineyards sort of just go on. They're much more continuous than being about, kind of single hills or single slopes. So when we're talking about Rioja, what's really, I would say, the most important thing, this is different when we're talking about Burgundy or some other regions. The most important thing about Rioja is the producer right now. And that means it's most important to know, is this a producer that makes, and this is kind of what we can get into about how the wine tastes, is this a producer that makes, we can call like old school tasting Rioja, or is this a producer that makes sort of like really simple, just kind of fruity, inexpensive Rioja? So with that, Rioja, there's kind of 3 parts to it. The best part is called Rioja Alta. That's really not that important. It's a smaller area, but what's most important is that that this wine comes from there. It comes from really good vineyards. And I think that's probably where Chris is hanging out too. Then after that is the grape, right? So the grape, the main grape, you can blend in some other grapes, but the main grape that we're talking about is called Tempranillo. You won't really ever see that on a label unless it's like grown somewhere else, you'll always see Rioja on a label. But it'll always be mostly Tempranillo, and then there's a couple of other grapes, Grenache, or as they call it, Garnacha, which we spoke a little bit about in the Rhone session. It's the same grape, kind of tastes different in Spain, but it's really, I think, like the Southern Rhone, it's kind of a blending grape for the most part, especially in Rioja. And then there's some other grapes that you don't really ever see on their own, but they're just kind of thrown in there to add color or flavor or whatever. So we have Rioja is the region, right? Lopez de Heredia, I hope you're drinking it, is the producer. Tempranillo is the grape, right? And then I don't know if you want to throw up on the bottom, Chris, whatever. It's called Viña Cubio. You can kind of see it on the bottom there. That's
yeah, let me pull the bottle up. I'll show you. I'll sort of do that while we're talking.
Yeah, pull the bottle up there.
We took a really fancy photo of the bottle, which is super exciting.
Oh,
keep going.
We got the photo upgrade. It's called Viña Cubio. So Lopez de Heredia, they make 3 different red wines, or 3 different vineyards. And then the thing that I think is really important, I did not take that photo because it's really good. Thank you, Emily. But there you go. So Viña Cubio. So Lopez de Heredia, and then Viña Cubio. All Cubio means is in this instance, they're the only producer of Cubio. They make 2 other red wines called Tondonia and Bosconia. Those are a little bit more expensive. But Cubio just really in this instance tells you how long the wine has been aged, and a little bit of like some of the, there's a different grape blend between the different vineyards per se. But what's really important is that Viña Cubio is the wine that they age for the shortest amount of time, which is crazy to believe because this is 2011. We'll talk about how old wine tastes because as soon as I open this up, it's a great example of like some of those other flavors. But what's really important about Rioja is instead of like, we thinking about the town is the aging requirements of the wine, because that really tells you how much, how the wine tastes and also will hence also dictate a little bit of the price too. So,
so this one's been aged the least of the 3, right? From a time perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So this
from a price perspective is the most affordable of their sort of 3 different wines.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. So you have 3. It's on the back label, but it's called Crianza.
I got that too. Stand by.
Cool.
Keep talking.
It's called Crianza. And then there's Reserva, which you see in like a lot of other regions too, right? There's Barolo Reserva. There's Reserva in Tuscany. Winemakers in California will throw Reserve on a wine, etc. So you see that word Crianza up there. That's a legal term for the minimum amount of time that the wine must be aged. And then there's Gran Reserva. So there's, I don't know, we'll break it down like this, is that Crianza is 2 years minimum aging. Reserva is 3 years. Gran Reserva is 5 years, right? We're not like trying to make you guys pass a master sommelier exam here or anything. But what's most important about that is that those words, so Crianza, Reserva, or Gran Reserva, will really tell you how the wine tastes, because the longer the wine spends in barrel, the different the taste will be, right? Think of it like whiskey. If you have, I don't know, a 10-year-old whiskey or a 20-year-old whiskey, it's the same stuff, but obviously it just tastes a lot different because of the amount of time that it spends in oak. And this is the same thing. So this wine actually is aged for 3 years. Lopez is known for aging their wines for a really long time. In these, like, they're giant. They're like as big as our wine shop, oak barrels. And then they, might use some smaller ones, but in general, they're just old oak barrels that are kind of funky looking that the wine ages in. And that really affects the taste. And that's something that I think Rioja is really known for is the impact of oak on the grapes. So we have Rioja, right? It's in that little bit of Spain, kind of sort of towards the north. Tempranillo is the grape. we're drinking Lopez de Heredia, no matter what, is definitely the most iconic, and I think still today makes some of the greatest wines. And then this is Crianza, but it really technically is a Reserva. Um,
Do you want to talk a little bit about like the oak? So I think oak is
yeah,
interesting for people because it's prevalent in so much of the wine that we all drink, and I think it sometimes feels like it can be a little confusing just because there's a difference in, you know, you talked about the size of the barrel, right? Like that's going to have an impact on the way the wine tastes. Whether the oak is new or old oak is going to have an impact on the on how the wine tastes. So I think it's probably kind of useful to talk about that as it relates to Rioja because it is a good example of oak, you know, and
definitely.
wine and how that affects the flavor.
Yeah. So um, there's two things, right? And kind of the way we talk about it is that there's oaky wines, right? To where like you actually taste the flavor of oak. It tastes like whiskey. It tastes like if anybody actually drinks cognac still, it tastes like cognac because those are the same barrels. Whiskey's aged in American oak, which this wine is. Cognac's aged in French oak. And if you're really getting nitty gritty, they have different flavors, whatever. But oak it's the flavor that like you taste in California Cabernet is consistently oaky. California Chardonnay, a lot of like wines from California, you have a lot of oak flavors in them, and those are those kind of like cinnamon, really, really prominent, spicy, almost like sweet flavors. It tastes like booze in a lot of ways. But then there's wines that are aged in oak, and when wines are aged in oak versus being aged in like other things, like you might have seen a photo of a winery that has like big stainless steel containers or cement containers or whatever, is that the wine is exposed to oxygen in a different way. So the flavors of the wine, instead of being like really fruity and really fresh, in this instance, they get a little bit more like dried out and kind of leathery and a little bit funkier and a little bit, I don't know, earthier in a way than otherwise. So that's why I think the aging is really important. If you see a wine that's just like says Rioja and it's a really young vintage, that's going to be kind of like a Cote d'Aron. It'll be really fruity. It'll be really fresh, really kind of easy drinking. And then if you see something like Gran Reserva, the wine is going to be just ultimately have a lot of like different flavors than what you might be used to. It's going to be a lot more spicy, kind of taste like cigars, that kind of like dried out sort of woody flavor to it. So that's
I think we talked in the book about it tasting like if you smoked a cigar and ate a cherry pie.
definitely, this one smells like cherry pie. I don't like to get too poetic about things, but when we cracked it open, that's right where I went.
So
Um,
before we get too much more into that, because I want to talk about like what the wine tastes like and the rest like towards the end where we talk about it. But I think there's still some. I want to kind of back up a little bit because there's a lot of information that we just sort of covered and dove right into the aging part, which I think is super important because you are going to see these terms on bottles as you're looking around for Rioja. But I just I think it's worth because there are a couple questions even that we're addressing this like, you know, blends, right? So it's Tempranillo, but this has also got some other stuff in it, the wine that we're drinking. And
yeah,
so you want to talk a little bit, I think worth probably talking a little bit more about how common that is, right, in Rioja, like how often you see wines that are, you know, Tempranillo driven, but probably also blended with other stuff and why. And then
yeah,
also, you know, there's a lot that we put into this worksheet about, you know, elevation and altitude and some of the weather stuff that definitely affects how this all works. So I just want to make sure we don't skip over that too much.
okay, cool. So let's talk. We'll talk about like the weather because I think that affects the grapes a lot too. So um, weather is like, you know, especially in the old world, right? We wrote about that. Is that really what you're talking about with that is France, Italy, and Spain, as far as like the classic wine countries. We can all agree that, you know, those are the ones. Sure, you know, Portugal or Slovenia, whatever, which are in Europe, have been making wine for a really long time too. But those are like our three main wine producing areas. All of those areas have their own grapes, and those grapes have always thrived in very specific areas according to the climate, right? And then the new world is people are like, okay, cool, this is kind of like Bordeaux, or this is kind of like Rioja in terms of just the weather, the mountains, etc. We're going to plant those grapes there. But you can taste, and we'll get into this a little bit with some of the other regions in Spain, is you very much can taste a wine really what the weather is like in that area. You can definitely taste it in the wine. So a general rule is that if it's warm, the wine is bigger, therefore fruitier, a little bit higher in alcohol. If it's cold, the wine is like lighter, it's crisper, even if it's a red wine. It's lower in alcohol. It's just lighter and yeah, in that way. So Rioja, I think part of the reason too why we call it like Spain's greatest wine region is because it's a big wine. And so for a long time when people were like, all right, cool, we have Bordeaux, we have Barolo, what has Spain got? And Spain had Rioja. Spain also had a couple of other regions that really blew up too, called Priorat and Ribera del Duero. But the sort of tradition of Rioja was like, all right, this is Spain's like big, powerful, it can age a really long time kind of wine. And that's because it's dry there, right? Tempranillo naturally is a grape. It's not as dark as Cabernet, and you can kind of see that when you're looking at the wine. It's not like super purple or kind of inky, but the dry climate there, you can see it sort of looks like the desert, but just loaded up with green vineyards. There you go. Some castles in the desert.
Arid, but beautiful.
Yeah. It makes wines that are bigger and juicier. And you know, for a long time, people thought that like light wines just couldn't age well. They thought that you needed this kind of like robust flavor and alcohol to the wines to be able to age. And so those were the wines that became really popular. So the climate of Rioja is just really good for growing grapes in general. You could, because it's so warm and dry, that's like pretty ideal. We were talking about that last week with Chateauneuf-du-Pape, like 13 different grapes grow there. When it's really warm and dry, it's better for grapes than when it gets really wet. You get a lot of like mold and it's too cold, they don't get ripe, and then it tastes like lemons, whatever. So a region like Rioja, that's kind of where you see like on all the different aspects of every single hill, they just have grapes planted everywhere because the climate is really perfect for that. But traditionally, what you find there is like we became really obsessed with this idea of a blend, right? And it's like you might have heard, I don't know, your uncle or something be like, I love blends. Like, what does that mean? It doesn't really mean
Uncle
shit.
Steve every time.
Yeah, because almost all wine, like a lot of wine, except for Burgundy, and a few other regions, are like blends of different grapes. And what that is in these vineyards too, is like you can like look up Lopez and it'll be like 70% of this and 10% of that and 20% of that. But like nobody's out there building a recipe, right? They like go down that line of vineyards and they pick grapes, but they know that there's some different grapes, you know, planted within there. And those are just the grapes that have been planted there for a really long time. So in terms of Rioja, like Tempranillo is very much the driver. That's like the one that you get a lot of flavor from. But there's been other grapes that have been just planted there historically that are kind of scattered around that get fermented and then therefore made into wine with this. So everything kind of gets thrown into like a big vat, a big wine tub.
And added for a certain flavor purpose, right? I mean, a lot of it's to balance things out and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So like a grape like Grenache, like Tempranillo, right? And even when you guys taste this, it's probably like a little tart. It's like a little acidic, which I think is a good thing. Grenache is really low in acid. It's really fruity. So that kind of softens the wine and makes it just a little bit richer, a little bit more plush in flavor. And that's kind of the idea, was to like create a little bit of a recipe, but it's not perfect science at the end of the day. There's a lot of wines that they'll call like field blends. That just means this person that family like has a vineyard. There's a whole bunch of grapes there. They just pick all the grapes. It's kind of thrown into it. And the final product, what is what's most important. You don't really ever know actually what's in there, but as long as the wine tastes good, then, you know, who really cares? But
But the takeaway is Tempranillo is really what matters here, and that's what you should sort of focus on.
Yeah,
Um, we
it's
mentioned
hard
it.
to, you don't really find Tempranillo elsewhere, right? So your Tempranillo's the main grape.
I've had Tempranillo from just outside of Austin, Texas, believe it or not, which was kind of weird, but they grow it in other places, just not commonly.
Is anybody from Texas in here?
Spicewood, man. We'll cover that. We're going to do a whole class on Spicewood, Texas next week.
Talk sure about Texas for a second.
Yeah. What about, I mean, we mentioned in the worksheet white wine. There is some white wine from Rioja, not a ton of it. And I think Lopez makes a white, don't they?
Yeah, they make it white and then it ages for a long time. Cedric might know how long, but it definitely ages for a few years, probably like 3 years, two or 3 years.
Oh, super weird.
You know, it's really weird. It looks brown. I've been lucky to have like old versions of it. It's amazing. It's like one of the weirdest, but also I think most distinct white wines in the world. It's really cool stuff. But it's not like if you just go out and grab any other Rioja Blanco, you're not going to get like the Lopez white experience. It's pretty singular in that regard. But Lopez or Rioja white, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of boring. Sort of, the grape is called Viura. It's really a red wine area unless there's something wacky out there like the Lopez.
So obviously, look, I mean, producer is super important in every instance. And obviously that's no different here in Rioja. So we talked a lot about Lopez. We'll talk specifically about that. I want to sort of focus on the wine itself quickly before we move on, but also just like they're on the list here, but just let's cover a couple of the other producers that you should look for, you know, from Rioja. If you can, you know, Lopez is actually everywhere, so you probably won't have a hard time finding that if you're looking for Rioja, but a couple others on here that are worth mentioning.
Another good one, La Rioja Alta. That's an easy one to remember, just because it's not a super weird name. That is, yeah, you'll find that just about everywhere too, in a whole bunch of different ranges. And if you see like a wine from Lopez or Rioja Alta or from any other producer in Rioja, and you see like a $30 bottle and a $50 bottle and a $100 bottle, that I promise you is just because the wine just aged longer in oak. So it's probably what we're talking about, like Crianza to Gran Reserva. So if you like this, then go for the cheap one. If you want something that's like really big, then go for the expensive one.
But even, you know, it's funny because expensive in this region, I mean, you get really good wine, and I love Rioja because you can actually drink older wine for a reasonably, you know, a reasonable price. Like you can drink 15-year-old wine for what, I don't know, like 50, 60, 70 bucks, depending on, you know, what you're buying, which isn't cheap, but it's cheaper than you'll find a really high quality wine with that much age on it typically.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why we've always had it in the restaurants, because for old wine, it always delivers and it's cheap, it's inexpensive, and you get like a lot of those kind of different flavors and utility out of it. And then the last two, the Aquitaine and Olivier Rivière. Sorry for my Spanish speakers there, but those are two like kind of natural smaller producers that I wanted to put in there that I think are really exciting and making just really great wines. They're good value. Nowadays you can throw it in a Google search and find it at a wine shop if they have it. You should definitely check those wines out as well. But Rioja, I think, like, you know, there's a lot of parts in the world to where you can kind of just shoot from the hip and grab like a producer and trust that it'll be really consistent. But Rioja is super, super producer specific. What you find, and somebody asked this earlier, is this idea of like old school winemaking, right? And then like new school stuff, not even new school, but just commercialized. And you get a lot of that in Rioja because it's such a big area and it's such a big name, is that you will get a lot of wines that do just taste like kind of like Zinfandel. They're just fruity and oaky and probably loaded up with a bunch of like flavors and shit that you just don't want to be drinking. And that's just that, you know, they're taking like the brand name of Rioja, they're making a really inexpensive wine, but you're not really getting more out of that wine than you would just, you know, in a kind of a simple oaky fruity wine from anywhere else in the world. So it's kind of a little bit of a tricky area, though it's really well known to navigate. Um, and there's unfortunately more bad Rioja than there is good Rioja, but that's why I think in this session we're focusing on a single producer even more so than we've done in the past, because this is one, and then the others are some that you can really find that I think represent like what's unique about the place, rather than just tasting like wine that could kind of be grown anywhere. You know what I
Somebody
mean?
asked about a couple of specific producers. One was Marquez de Riscal or Islos.
I don't know Islos, but Marquez de Riscal, some of the older stuff, I like their wines that are like more the Reserva level stuff. And the Grand Reserva level stuff can be pretty good for sure. And you see that one and on. But I will check out Islos. Caroline Adams, we got a Texan.
A lot of Texans. And then and for some of you guys that are asking questions about some other regions, that we'll try to cover some of that towards the end, just to try and tackle each one of the questions you have about
Should we
other.
talk about how this wine tastes?
Yes, that's where we should go next.
Sweet. Cool. I hope you guys are, whatever you're drinking, we'll walk you through a little bit how to taste, and then we'll talk about some of the flavors in this and where those things come from. That's how you drink wine.
Got a big glass of nothing.
So the thing with like tasting wine that I think people complicate it is they'll slurp it, they'll gargle it, they do all this weird shit. You really don't have to do that. Just drink it. And what's important is hopefully we'll say a couple of things, and then chances are you'll smell them before you taste them. So smelling the wine is super important, because I personally, I think you smell more of like the unique characteristic than you tasted even, in terms of the specific flavors. But this wine's cool when you look at it. I don't know if you can't really see, but the wine kind of has like a, Chris, are you drinking it? It has the sort of like brickish hue to it, meaning that it's not like really purple in color. It's a little bit, I don't know, looks like a little kind of rustier, a little bit more brown even to it. That color is from what happens when a wine ages in oak for a little while. So if you're ever looking at a wine and you see that it's like not necessarily like light, like when you're looking at Pinot, it's light, but it's really vibrant. But this is like light in color, but I don't know, it just looks a little more brown. That means that the wine is aged, and that can be a good thing. And it's also a sign if it's like totally brown and it looks like soy sauce, then the wine is probably dead. It's aged too long. But this wine, I think some of the color really does tell you a lot about it. We don't really focus a lot on that. But
this one's interesting too, because like you said, it's a fuller bodied wine, but it's a little lighter than other fuller bodied wines just because the grapes have thinner skins, right? So it's a little bit, it can be deceptive in that sense that, especially with some age on it, these wines can actually look pretty light compared to a cab or something like that that's got a similar amount of years on it.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you taste it, I think the first like taste that you get, and this is where I think this wine is like, it's definitely leans towards being a bigger wine, but it's not, as big as a Cabernet. But the first thing that you taste is that you still do taste like a lot of fruity flavors, right? It does taste a lot like cherries, kind of like cooked sort of jammy fruit, sort of like covers your mouth. It's really rich. And then afterwards, you do start to taste some of the like oaky kind of earthy flavors to it. So this wine in particular, and I think as soon as you taste it, then like wait a little while and start to think about, I don't know, like a shot of whiskey that you took not too long ago. You taste the same exact flavors, and you taste like vanilla, you taste smoke, you taste cinnamon, you taste cigar. All those flavors are from the aging process and a little bit from the grape. But that's what's so unique about Rioja, is that this is a grape that ages really well in oak, and that you get some of the like oak characteristics, but I think it integrates really well with with the overall flavor of the grapes too. So for me, and it's a wine that, as far as fruit goes, it tastes a lot like cherries and strawberries. But what I really like about it are all of those kind of spicy flavors to it. And then also, we spoke a little bit about it. Tempranillo is a grape that I think like Brunello, and even like Pinot too, is a grape that has a lot of acidity to it. So when
Yeah.
you drink it and your mouth kind of puckers, that's what acidity is. It's just tartness at the end of the day. So this wine definitely has some of that, and it's probably making you hungry because that's
So
what acidity does.
if you had a Grand Reserva next to this, what would be the most remarkable difference?
It would be bigger, right? So what would happen is, like, when you taste it, the whole thing would be, it would be like, I feel like more like you had like some like hot fudge kind of experience in your mouth. It would just be,
Milkshake.
yeah, exactly. It's just bigger, richer, rounder. There's just more flavor going on with it, which a lot of people become like obsessed with, right? They're like, I only want a wine if it's like full of flavor. That just kind of gets boring. That's like, I only want to eat like chocolate cake for the rest of my life. Like, good on you, but that's not going to work out. So the difference in flavor with Crianza and Gran Reserva, etc., is that the Gran Reserva wines will tend to be bigger, and you'll get more of those kind of like cooking spice, cinnamon, clovey sort of flavors in them from the oak aging.
Um, cool. Well,
I hope you like this. This is a good wine.
it's a great wine. I really think for me, I love these wines because dollar for dollar, they're just a great value and they're great gifting wines. If you have the friend that, or coworker or something that likes wine a lot and you don't want to spend a ton of money, but you want something nice, I think these are always super, super good options for that. I've certainly bought my share of them around Christmas time for people. So cool. Well, I think like one other thing before we move on, because I want to make sure we have time for kind of the rest of Spain, which is obviously there's a lot to cover. But what about like, are there any vintages specifically that like, I guess, fairly recent vintages that people should look for? How much does that matter in Rioja?
It matters in Rioja a lot because some producers might like only produce a Gran Reserva wine in the best vintages. Like Lopez does that for some of their wines. So I think the vintages that are on the market like now that you're most prone to find in your wine shop that aren't 2011 that are really good is look for 2004, 2007, and 2009 are all good Rioja vintages for sure. So
Oh, and then also, because this was a question, we got to cover it. What should you pair Rioja with? What should you eat with it?
oh man, you should eat a big. I wish we were outside grilling right now, but nobody should be outside. You should have like grilled steak and grilled pork chops or some ribs. I'd eat the hell out of some ribs right now. But it's a meaty wine. Don't eat seafood. Oak and seafood is kind of gross,
Yeah.
right? Just doesn't. You can taste that, right? We're talking about like, I don't know, peppery, savory flavors. Yeah, that doesn't really work with seafood. So I would say like,
We'll cover a lot of seafood wine in just a second.
yeah, lots of seafood. That's where we're going. That's why I want to talk about this. So yeah, meat.
Eat
Go
meat.
for it.
Great. Cool. All right. And again, like we'll try to cover some of the other questions you guys have about other regions if we don't hit them in this New Spain area of the document. But obviously, that's the next section here. What we're calling New Spain, and as we say in the worksheet, obviously it's not actually new, but it is new to us and certainly new, I think, broadly in the wine world. And Galicia is probably the first place to talk about, certainly the first place to talk about outside of Rioja. And I think probably very familiar for those of you that have had plenty of Albarino in your life. But there's other stuff too, obviously, and great producers that, particularly one that we'll get to who I love. So let's talk a little bit about New Spain, and you can kind of tee up why, certainly, especially Galicia is so important.
Yeah, I think so. We'll try to put it on a map. But somebody just asked about Portugal too. So Galicia is like, if Portugal's on the Atlantic coast there.
Map coming. Stand by.
Hit
Keep
it.
talking.
Hit the map. Galicia is like just a little bit, is just north of that. So it's, I don't know what happened, but Portugal got shorted out of the deal and they just chopped off. So Spain has this little nugget of what probably should be Portugal. So Galicia, if you like Portuguese wine, Galicia is very, wow, that's a nice, I want to be there. That's exactly. So you got Portugal and then it just pops straight up. Galicia. So it's the northwestern corner of Spain. I think it started out being really important because of Albarino, which is Spain's like main white wine nowadays for sure. I'm sure you guys have all had Albarino at one point or another. It's a super common grape. Um, and nowadays there's a couple of other regions that are really starting to pop up because of a few really good winemakers and just good style of wine, and all you people out there are just more curious about wine in general. So Galicia is known for Albarino, which you'll see, I think we wrote it in here, Rias Baixas, that's how it's called. Those are like, if you imagine on the coast there, all the like little rivers that kind of come into the coast, they form, yeah, yeah, sort of see what I'm talking about. I don't know. Rias Baixas is that kind of general area right along the coast, where you have Albarino grows. So it's Albarino also grows in Portugal too, right? Because traditionally that's just what works in that climate. Though it's on the coast, it's not necessarily like where I'm at down in Tenerife here. It's rockier, it's cooler, it's more wet. It's a really good region, therefore, what we were talking about earlier, for kind of crisper wines.
I
So
think, yeah, that's actually something that's kind of worth pointing out, because if you look at the screen here, Rioja is just sort of south of Bilbao, that town that's kind of highlighted like right here, if you can see that. But so this is sort of, it's not exactly, it's a similar latitude, I guess, but obviously very, it's a different climate for a few reasons. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's important to kind of frame why the wines are so different, even though it's not that far away, or,
yeah. I don't know. It's like in San Francisco, right? San Francisco is really cold, and then if you drive inland or you go up to Napa Valley, it's super hot, right? And that's just the impact that the ocean has on these areas. And so it's just the like coastal temperature changes, so it's cooler, and therefore the wines when it's colder, the wines just taste, they're lighter and they taste crisper, and there's a different flavor to it. So I think it's, Napa Valley, I remember being like in San Francisco one day wearing a sweater, and then you go up to Napa and it's like 95 degrees. It's crazy how quickly things can change in just an hour. That's probably like
pretty similar.
Yeah, pretty similar, same kind of program. A little bit further because there's not giant highways that'll get you there, littered with in and out. But the difference is really just the like coastal impact. So it's cooler, and that's why I think you see Albariño, which is a white grape that's usually pretty low in alcohol, and is really, I think, really like citrusy and salty and crisp and really just delicious.
And always good with seafood.
Cheap wine, always good with seafood, and there's a lot of really, really good seafood in that area. They're fishing all day long. So
is there such a thing as expensive Albariño?
There's a couple, but you should probably steer clear of it. Like really expensive, just because that usually when a white wine in particular, jumps up in price, it means that, two things. First one, in the instance of Albariño, you want to steer away from it. If a white wine, like if you see like expensive Sancerre, right? Really expensive Sancerre, it can either mean two things. One is that maybe they aged it in oak, and you just don't want that, because you don't want you don't need an oaky Albariño, like a big Albariño. That's just weird, but I don't think you really see that as much. Or what it can mean is that the wine is from like a really small vineyard, and it's super rare and kind of precious in that way. And in that instance, it could be worth it. There could be some value for it for sure. So I think, you know, one of the producers that we talk about in here, this guy Raul Perez, I wish you could throw up a photo of him.
Oh my
He's an
God, amazing.
awesome.
Hold on, I'm about to Google that.
Yeah. He's a guy who he makes, like, I don't even know, but he has his hands in a lot of different wine projects in this area. And he's just a really, really talented winemaker. And he makes wine in a style that I really like. He makes a couple of Albariños that jump up in price. And those are just because they're really hard. He doesn't make that much of it. So there you go.
Look at this legend.
Yeah. You want wine from a guy that looks like that.
This guy was I went into Charlie Bird one night and this dude was sitting in there with some friends. And I was like, wait, is that Rick Rubin? And then somebody's like, no, that's Raul Perez and he's a bigger man.
He is like the Rick Rubin of wine.
Yeah. Incredible.
Everybody loves him. And he's smart.
His wines are amazing, by the way. We'll get to that a little bit later, but that guy makes
a whole range. He makes some really inexpensive wines, and then he makes some wines that definitely jump up in price, which I don't know. But for me, Albariño, I think don't buy the cheapest one because there's a lot of like just commercialized, not organic, like they make it fast and it's not really good kind of Albariño. But Galicia, Albariño, and then that little man with a giant beard really, I think, as of recently, threw up on a map a grape called Mencia. I'm not going to do my Spanish list, but Mencia is the grape
I was waiting for that to come up in this session.
of Ribera Sacra, which we wrote down there. Mencia, check it out. Ask for it at your wine shop. Maybe in a future wine class, we'll talk about it. It's a grape that we started using at Pasquale Jones, Dan Bugstad, who really, I think, turned me on to it. It's always pretty inexpensive, kind of tastes like Syrah. It's really peppery, it's really fresh, and it's just a delicious wine. Ribera Sacra is this crazy river with these really, really like extreme, they have to use like harnesses to pick grapes and stuff. It's wild. Old vineyards there. For whatever that's worth, the grapes, the wines are really, really great, and I mark my words, they'll definitely be on your radar more and more.
I think I might hold on, I might be able to switch my background and show you.
Look at that!
Isn't that it?
Yeah, people are farming there. We have all these like corn farmers in Iowa sitting on like big old tractors, and you got little men like Raul Perez climbing through the vineyards. That's the wine you want. But Ribera Sacra and Ribeiro is a cool region for white wine that you're starting to see, I think, a little bit more in restaurants that are and wine shops that are paying attention. But the reason we wanted to talk about these areas is I think, you know, like Italy too, but really in Spain, there's a couple of importers that I would say only as of recently, and like recently, I mean like the last 5 years, you're starting to see more of these wines come to the market, and there's producers that are just devoted to making like a better quality wine from grapes that nobody necessarily heard of. And that's great because we're all like consumers that are excited about trying new and different things, right? So Spain, all the time I try some like wine from Spain, from a region that I've never heard of, or a producer that I've never heard of, and maybe a grape that I've never heard of, and the wine is delicious. It has just like the right flavor that you want from it. And it's not delicious because it's made in some like weird, wacky, natural way. Just naturally, the grapes are really good. And you see like a spot like that, like that's a really, you know, wine, you know, grapes that are grown in some of these challenging areas definitely have more of a unique flavor, or the potential to have a unique flavor than grapes that are grown like out in the super, super flat zones, like California wine country where they make like cheap jug Gallo box wine. Like that's just flat. And the thing is like they can make more money growing grapes than they can growing like wheat or fucking artichokes, who knows, whatever else they grow out in like the central valleys of California, but it's really easy for them to do that. And therefore the wines are just like fruity and kind of simple. But in these areas, it's really exciting. There's a lot of really great wine coming from Spain that's cheap. Like these wines are as inexpensive as good wine can get, I
I
would
think
say.
if you're going to take one thing from this little section of today, I think just trying some Raul Perez wines is a great way to explore and pretty much guarantee you're going to drink something good.
Definitely. I will say my tolerance for drinking a whole bottle of wine has gotten a lot better
Yeah, thanks.
over the
Thanks for
last 4 weeks.
uh,
I
really
want
quick. So go ahead. Sorry.
no, hit me.
Let's just do Canary Islands and Basque Country, and then I want to just talk about a couple regions that people have asked about before we
Okay,
finish.
cool. So the reason we threw these in, there's definitely other regions in Spain, Priorat, Ribera del Duero, Cava, Sherry, etc., that you'd see more. But we're here to tell you some of the regions that we think you should be looking out for that you may not have heard of, right? So you probably heard of Albarino, but you probably haven't heard of Mencia. The Canary Islands, and then also the Basque Country, I think, are making really exciting wines right now. And these are the areas that we're like trying to find more producers of and just looking out for wine from those areas. So the Canary Islands, you have islands that are, I don't know, I guess in the Mediterranean, so to speak, and like Sicily, like Corsica, all of these islands have their own grapes, they have their own history, they have their own traditions over winemaking. They're beautiful, they're expensive places to go to and party. There's yachts, they're crazy, etc. But on these islands, they're all volcanic islands, which is an important thing. If you're really diving into it, these volcanic islands make wines that taste consistently really similar. So I would say the wines of the Canary Islands are similar to the wines of Sicily and Sardinia too. But the Canary Islands are making really great wines. Their grapes are weird, Listan Blanco and whatever. There's a bunch of like unique grapes that are grown there. You don't see Albarino, you don't see Sauvignon Blanc, but you see wines that are from that area. What you can expect is a wine that shouldn't be too expensive. It's a little bit kind of fruitier than what you would find maybe Albarino to be, just a little bit richer just because the weather's a little bit warmer, but they're still kind of smoky and salty, great with seafood, and just have different flavors and I think are really exciting. So
Probably see them in natural wine shops too.
yeah, you see them for sure. So just because, yeah, there's some of that going on there, definitely. But this one producer here, our friends at Noble Rot, wrote about it a little bit ago. We used to buy it all the time, and then I tried to buy it in advance of this for Parcel, and we got shot down, which sucks. But it's called Suertes del Marquez. Like, look out for that. That wine is amazing. It's really good. And then this producer and Vinate, we have a little bit of it at the shop, and Vinate really blew up in the natural wine world a couple years ago. They are a group of 4 kids, guys, whatever, their 30s, early 40s, who are making wine from these old forgotten vineyards all over Spain. Kind of whatever they put their hands on is really well made and exciting. So if you see that, try to hunt it down. They're definitely a little bit funkier, kind of cloudy, weird wines, but really, really great stuff, and not too expensive too. And then Basque Country, I just threw this out there because I find that people ask about it. A grape called a wine called Chacoli.
I love that shit. I went to Spain 10 years ago, and we went to San Sebastian, and I started drinking Chacoli, and it's amazing. You can drink a lot of it.
You drink a lot of it, and that's why we put it in there. This is by no means Spain's like premier wine region. We're not saying that, but there's good rosé, there's good white wine. It should always have a screw top. It should never be more than $30, and you can just chug it. And
it's always going to be great with some gambas and like some seafood, and they pour
exactly.
it from really high up, and it's fun and great. I love that stuff.
You do the whole thing. So that's what's going on in Basque Country. Sorry if there's anybody out there that I just simplified Basque Country down to chugging cheap wetland.
Isn't there though some natural wine, like kind of funky stuff happening in this area? I feel like I always hear about like that's like always the two brothers who have some vineyards like in Basque Country making some very random grape.
Yeah, you see stuff like there and also around Madrid. There's some, yeah, stuff kind of in all these like little random parts of Spain. There's grapes all over Spain, and there's nowadays natural wine is really blown up in Spain. And I think they're doing a pretty good job of it actually. Whereas like the Italians aren't, sorry folks, aren't doing a great job of natural wine, but Spain I think is doing a really good job of it in that they're making like natural wines that aren't just totally like fucking weird tasting. But we're gonna do a natural wine thing where we'll get into that at some point. But what else?
There was, it sounds like there was definitely some questions about, did we cover Priorat at all? I know there was a few questions about that, and also Rueda, there was a few questions about.
Yeah, so Priorat's a region that became really well known. It became really well known when we all used to love to drink wine that had as much alcohol in it as possible, so it just make you fall asleep. The grape there is Garnacha. The wines, yeah, they became really popular in the American market a little bit ago. There are a couple exciting producers there now. This producer Terroir Al Limite in particular is making really good wines. But in general, the wines can be like a little bit more expensive, and it was just a region that we could definitely spend some time on, but we didn't necessarily want to highlight. But usually pretty big wines. There's some good stuff going down there, but it definitely depends on the producer. Grenache, it's very much the Chateauneuf du Pape of Spain.
Cool.
What else?
Well, I think we're out of time, but there's a lot of questions. So I think what we'll do is please, like, you can send us questions through wine@theinfatuation.com is an email that we all get. We're happy to answer questions through that. Please give us feedback on these. Again, like doing our best to make them structured, purposeful, fun, engaging, and all the rest. And I think all the feedback we get either via survey. I think we sent a survey out this week, which was super helpful, and also just via email is awesome. So please send that along. I'm got some good feedback here in the chat. Thank you for asking so many questions. We'll get another email out soon. Next week we're doing the Loire Valley, I believe, and there are wines you can buy at Parcel. Then we'll send out an email in the next couple days in advance of that. The last thing we would just ask is we are, obviously not charging for these, but trying to just raise money for good causes. The one that the Infatuation Zagat has sort of gotten behind is Jose Andres' World Central Kitchen. We just beat our first goal of $10,000 and have upped it to 20. So thank you guys who all participated. That's great. Every little bit helps, even $5. So thank you guys so much for that. And yeah, just keep the feedback coming. These have been super fun for us. Hopefully they've been fun and useful for you. And we got a bunch more on the way. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your night.
Awesome. Thanks guys. Have fun. Peace.